back. Well, it might only be Tuesday, but it's already proven to be a busy week with debates over free speech, energy policy, growing US tensions with Iran, the end of Cory Bernardi's Australian Conservatives, Facebook washing its hands over online comments, a gender perspective, if you could believe it, on climate change and more. So when I want to know what you're making of it all, I talk to the people you talk to. Joining me tonight is two of the best. Host of Overnights, the program on Radio 2GB, Michael McLaren, and host of Queensland's 4BC Drive program, Mark Braybrook. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your time tonight. As I said, it's only Tuesday, but I feel like there's a hell of a lot going on. I want to start with a decision taken by the Sydney City Council, and it comes in the back of similar sort of virtue signalling movements, particularly in the United Kingdom, about declaring a climate emergency. It happened last night. It was carried as a motion. It's absolutely meaningless. There's rubbish, there's rates, there's all the other things that Clover Moore should be fixated on, but it's obviously very much the job of climate. One of the Liberals, a guy called Craig Chung, a councillor on the Sydney City Council, spoke to my colleague Chris Kenny today. He had this to say.
This was the fundamentalist Clover at her best, using alarmist language and warning us that the world's going to end. Some of the contents of that motion are things that we really need to address. And if I want to sit at the table, if I want to be there taking part in the policy debate, I've got to get a seat at the table. Now, this is the
No,
left
that shouldn't be... sorry to interrupt, Craig, but that shouldn't be how politics and national debate works. You shouldn't vote for things that are patently nonsensical just because you want to be part of the gang.
Well, you know, here in the City of Sydney, this left group, they love to preach the idea of free speech and being inclusive, but I tell you what, the moment that you don't get involved in their motions and the moment that you cut yourself out, you get called all sorts of names. Last night I was called a flat earther and a coal lugger.
OK, Michael McLaren, if some bloke who thinks it's a crock and he's upset, he's a councillor, mind you, he's an elected councillor, gets upset that he's called a coal lugger and then, just to stay friends with the other group around the table, votes for something he doesn't believe in, you got to wonder where we're headed.
We do, but we've got to bear in mind this is the Sydney Council. They've got form on these sort of things. I mean, look, councils are meant to do the 3 Rs, aren't they? Rates, roads and rubbish. Well, they delivered last night in Sydney. They did the rubbish. This is Clover at her best, I suppose, but at the end of the day, there's all this talk about the City of Sydney being 100% renewable energy and clean energy and whatever. They'll offset all their carbon emissions. Look, if they were really serious about this, they'd half generate their own electricity. But of course, aside from a couple of solar cells on the top of 6-star office buildings that cost a fortune to rent per square metre, they don't generate any electricity at all in the City of Sydney. I mean, they are reliant on the New South Wales grid. That's 80% coal. If they were really trying to be so virtuous, they'd just cut the power lines on the outskirts of the city and generate their own electricity. They'd stick wind farms down Macquarie Street. But they're not going to do it. A lot of this is just some sort of rhetoric. And if only we could capture all the garbage that is the rhetoric and turn that into electricity, we'd have cheap energy in Australia, no doubt about it.
Well, other than the hot air that obviously sits around that table every time the council meets, if you could harness that, you probably wouldn't need coal-fired power in Sydney. But the problem with all of this, though, Mark, is when you have disjointed policy. You've got councils doing one thing and it's a hodgepodge right around the country. You've got these various different state renewable energy targets or state subsidies for renewables and other things demanding that coal be shut down. I've got a note here, the Yallourn Power Station in Victoria. It's slated to close in 2032. There's been meetings in the last couple of days, briefings by Energy Australia that the closure might happen earlier because the Victorian state government, who somehow thinks there's a curtain up at the state borders, that emissions in Victoria will be different than emissions around the world, but they want a 50% renewable energy target, which is making the job of keeping your lawn going so much more unpredictable. When you have all of this stuff going on, you don't get a comprehensive national agreement. You get Australian energy prices going through the roof. You get Australian jobs in big sector employers like smelters put at risk. When do you think someone's going to say this climate change emperor has no clothes?
Yeah, well, Peter, what it also does is strengthen the argument that we've got too many layers of government, that we can get rid of one layer and potentially councils. One of the things here in Queensland, and Brisbane in particular, we have is that Brisbane City Council is a lot bigger than Sydney. That Clovermore just represents a handful of people, basically doesn't represent the majority of Sydney-siders. Here in South East Queensland, we have Brisbane, Logan, Ipswich, Moreton and I suppose the Gold Coast and Sunshine Coast, massive councils, so they don't worry about that nonsense. And Michael's right with regards to the 3 Rs. And we're lucky here in South East Queensland, particularly after the recent federal election, that the climate argument is tending to be on the back foot, despite the fact we had Al Gore out here recently. I can't imagine Brisbane City Council popping their head up and doing what Clovermore did yesterday. And as I said, it's just another example of why we have too many layers of government. Do we really need Sydney City Council or councils in general?
Well, Mark, I agree with you on the layers of government, but you still had those goons up there, you know, superglue themselves to the road. Wish it was on a busy road and a road that went over the top of them. But anyway, they did that after the government had made a decision on the Adani mine. And you also have taxpayers funding a trip from Al Gore down to preach and tell Queenslanders what to think. Well, he should have just picked up the phone and rung Bob Brown and realised that Queenslanders don't want to hear what people in other states and overseas have to say, or even to be told what to say and what to think. I mean, surely they are going to be mugged by reality sooner rather than later, that people want to leave this debate behind. They want to do the right thing by the environment, but not at the cost of jobs and household budgets.
Oh, absolutely. The argument here is not about climate change. The argument here is about these people who believe in climate change and the terrible effects it's going to have, disrupting our lives now. You mentioned about those that glued their hands to the road. Well, that was during the week. And then Friday afternoon at 5 o'clock, there was this mass rally in Redcliffe Place, which is at the top end of Brisbane. They walked across the river to South Bank trying to protest again, disrupting people's lives. They don't care about anyone else but themselves. They put people out, people who have worked hard, 9 to 5, 8 to 6, whatever it may be, all week, wanting to get home on a Friday night to spend time with their family. And these ideologues who the ideology is so different to reality, just trying to cause problems for people who just want to get about their business. And that's what we're finding here. The arguments are not necessarily about the climate change, it's these people who are destroying and trying to dictate our lives.